Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with more A Testament of Hope by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I am hoping today to finish up The Strength to Love because we've only got like 12 pages left, so this will be a bit of a long one, but stick with me. I'll try to get through it as quick and painlessly as I can. Our God is able. Now unto him that is able to keep you from falling. Jude 24. At the center of the Christian faith is the conviction that the universe where there is a God of power who is able to do exceedingly abundant things in nature and in history. The convictions This conviction is stressed over and over in the Old and New Testaments. Theologically, this affirmation is expressed in the doctrine of the omnipresence of God. The God from whom we worship is not a weak and incompetent God. He is able to beat back uh, gigantic waves of opposition and to bring low prodigious mountains of evil. The ringing testimony of the Christian faith is that God is able. There are those who seek to convince us that only man is able. Their attempt to substitute a man-centered universe for a God-centered universe is not new. I had its it had its modern beginnings in the Renaissance and subsequently in the Age of Reason, when some men gradually came to feel that God was an unnecessary item on the agenda of life. In these periods, and later in the Industrial Revolution in England, others questioned whether God was any longer relevant. The laboratory began to replace the church, and the scientist became a substitute for the prophet. Not a few joined Swinburne in singing a new anthem, Glory to man in the highest, for man is the master of things. The devotees of the new man-centered religion point to the spectacular advances of modern science as justification for their faith. Science and technology have enlarged man's body. The telescope and television have enlarged his eyes. The telephone, radio, and microphone have strengthened his voice and ears. The automobile and airplane has lengthened his legs. The wonder drugs have prolonged his life. Have not these amazing achievements assured us that man is able? But alas, something has shaken the faith of those who have made the laboratory the new cathedral of men's hopes. The instruments which yesterday were worshipped today contain cosmic death, threatening to plunge all of us into the abyss of annihilation. Man is not able to save himself or the world. Unless he is guided by God's Spirit, his newfound scientific power will become a devastating Frankenstein monster that will bring to ashes his earthly life. At times, other forces cause us to question the ableness of God, the stark and colossal reality of evil in the world, what calls the giant agony of the world. Ruthless floods and tornadoes that wipe away people as though they were weeds in an open field. Ills like uh, the insanity plaguing some individuals from birth and reducing their days to tragic cycles of meaninglessness. The madness of war and the barbarity of man's inhumanity to man. Why, we ask, do these things occur if God is able to prevent them? This problem, namely the problem of evil, has always plagued the mind of man. I would limit my response to an assertion that much of the evil which we experience is caused by man's folly and ignorance, and also by the misuse of his freedom. Beyond this, I can say only that there is and always will be a penumbra of mystery surrounding God. What appears at the moment to be evil may have a purpose that our finite minds are incapable of comprehending. So, in spite of the presence of evil and the doubts that lurk in our minds, we shall wish not to surrender the conviction that our God is able. Let us notice first that God is able to sustain the vast scope of the physical universe. Here again, we are tempted to feel that man is the true master of the physical universe. Man-made jet planes compress into minutes distances that formerly required weeks of torturous effort. Man-made spaceships carry cosmonauts through outer space at fantastic speeds. Is not God being replaced in the mastery of the cosmic order? But before we are consumed by our too greatly by our man-centered arrogance, let us take a broader look at the universe. Will we not soon discover that our man-made instruments seem barely to be moving in comparison to the momentum of the God-created solar system? Think about the fact, for instance, that the Earth is circling the sun so fast that the fastest jet would be left 66,000 miles behind in the first hour of a space race. In the past 7 minutes, we have hurtled more than 8,000 miles through space. Or consider the sun, which scientists tell us is the center of the solar system. Our Earth revolves around this cosmic ball of fire once each year, traveling 584 million miles at the rate of 66,700 miles per hour, or 1,600,000 miles per day. By this time tomorrow, we shall be 1,600,000 miles from where we are in this hundredth of a second. The sun, which seems to be remarkably near, is 93 million miles from the Earth. 6 months from now, we shall be on the other side of the sun, 93 million miles beyond it. And in a year from now, we shall have swung completely around it and back to where we are right now. So when we behold the illimitable expanse of space, in which we are compelled to measure stellar distance in light years, and in which heavenly bodies travel at incredible speeds, we are forced to look beyond man and affirm anew that God is able. Let us notice also that God is able to subdue all the powers of evil. In affirming that God is able to conquer evil, we admit the reality of evil. Christianity has never dismissed evil as illusory or an error in the mortal mind. It reckons with evil as a force that has objective reality. But Christianity contends that evil contains the seed of its own destruction. History only to be crushed by the battling rams of the forces of justice, where there is a law in the mortal world, a silent, invisible imperative akin to the laws of the physical world, which reminds us that life will work only in a certain uh, way. The Hitlers and Mussolinis have their day, and for a period they may wield great power, spreading themselves like a green bay tree, but soon they are cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. In his graphic account of the Battle of Waterloo in Les Miserables, Victor Hugo wrote, "Was it possible that Napoleon should win this battle? We answer no. Why? Because of Wellington, because of Blucher. No, because of God. Napoleon had been impeached before the infinite, and the fall was decreed. He vexed God. Waterloo is not a battle. It is the change of front of the universe." In a real sense, Waterloo symbolizes the doom of every Napoleon and is an eternal reminder to the generation drunk on military power that in the long run of history might does not make right, and power of the sword cannot conquer the power of the spirit. An evil system known as colonialism swept from Africa to Asia, but then the quiet invisible law began to operate. Prime Minister Macmillan said, "The wind of change began to blow." The powerful colonial empires began to disintegrate like stacks of cards, and new independent nations began to emerge like refreshing oases in deserts sweltering under the heat of injustice. In less than 15 years, independence has swept through Asia and Africa like an irresistible tidal wave, releasing more than 1.5 million people from the crippling manacles of colonialism. In our own nation, another unjust and evil system known as segregation for nearly 100 years inflicted the Negro with a sense of inferiority, deprived him of his personhood, and denied him of his birthright of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Segregation has been the Negro's burden and America's shame. But as on the world scale, so our nation, the wind of change began to blow. One event has followed another to bring a gradual end to the system of segregation. Today, we know with certainty that segregation is dead. The only question remaining is how costly will be the funeral. These great changes are not mere political and sociological shifts. They represent the passing of systems that were born in injustice, nurtured in inequality, and reared in exploitation. They represent the inevitable decay of any system based on principles that are not in harmony with the moral laws of the universe. When in future generations men look back upon these turbulent, tension packed days through which we are passing, they will see God working through history for the salvation of man. They will know that God was working through those men who had the vision to perceive that no nation could survive half slave and half free. God is able to conquer the evils of history. His control is never usurped. If at times we despair because of the relatively slow progress being made in ending racial discrimination, and if we become disappointed because of the undue cautiousness of the federal government, let us gain new heart in the fact that God is able. In our sometimes difficult and often lonesome walk up freedom's road, we do not walk alone. God walks with us. He has placed within the very structure of the universe certain absolute moral laws. We can neither defy nor break them. If we disobey them, they will break us. The forces of evil may temporarily conquer truth, but truth will ultimately conquer its conqueror. Our God is able. James Russell Lowell was right. Truth forever in the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future and bound the dim unknown. Standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. Let us notice finally that God is able to give us interior resources to confront the trials and difficulties of life. Each of us faces circumstances in life which compel us to carry heavy burdens of sorrow. Adversity assails us with hurricane force. Glowing sunrises are transformed into darkest nights. Our highest hopes are blasted and our noblest dreams are shattered. Christianity has never overlooked these experiences. They come inevitably, like the rhythmic alteration of the natural order. Life has the glittering sunlight of the summers and the piercing chill of its winters. During days of unutterable joy are followed by days of overwhelming sorrow. Life brings periods of flooding and periods of drought. When these dark days of life emerge, many cry out with Paul Laurence Dunbar, a crust of bread and a corner to sleep in, a minute to smile and an hour to weep in, a pound of joy to peck and a peck of trouble, and never a laugh, but the moans come double. and that is life. Admitting the weighty problems and staggering disappointments, Christianity affirms that God is able to give us the power to meet them. He is able to give us the inner equilibrium to stand tall amid the trials and burdens of life. He is able to persuade inner peace amid outer storms. This inner stability of the man of faith, is Christ's chief legacy to his disciples. He offers neither material resources or a magical formula that exempts us from suffering and persecution, but he brings an imperishable gift. Peace I leave with thee. This is that peace which passeth all understanding. At times we may feel that we do not need God, but on the day when the storms of disappointment rage, the winds of disaster blow, and the tidal waves of grief beat against our lives, if we do not have a deep and patient faith, our emotional lives will be ripped to shreds. There is so much frustration in the world because we have relied on gods rather than God. We have genuflected before the God of science only to find that it has given us the atomic bomb, producing fears and anxieties that science can never mitigate. We have worshipped the God of pleasure only to discover that thrills play out and sensations are short lived. We have bowed before the God of money only to learn that there are such things as love and friendship that money cannot buy, and that in a world of possible depressions, stock market crashes, and bad business investments, money is a rather uncertain deity. These transitory gods are not able to save us or bring happiness to the human heart. Only God is able. It is faith in him that we must rediscover. With this faith we can transform bleak and desolate valleys into sunlit paths of joy that bring new light into the dark caverns of pessimism. Is someone here moving toward the sunlight of life and fearful of that which we call death? Why be afraid? God is able. Is someone here on the brink of despair because of the death of a loved one, the breaking of a marriage, or the waywardness of a child? Why despair? God is able to give you the power to endure that which cannot be changed. Is someone here anxious because of bad health? Why be anxious? Come what may, God is able. As I come to the conclusion of my message, I would wish you to permit a personal experience. I had no basic problems or burdens because the first 24 years of my life were years packed with fulfillment. I had no basic problems or burdens because of concerned and loving parents who provided for my every need. I sallied through high school, college, theological school, and graduate school without interruption. It was not until I became a part of the leadership of the Montgomery bus protest that I was actually confronted with the trials of life. Almost immediately after the protest had been undertaken, we began to receive threatening telephone calls and letters in our home. Sporadic in the beginning, they increased day after day. At first, I took them in stride, feeling that they were the work of a few hotheads who would be discouraged after they discovered that we would not fight back. But as the weeks passed, I realized that many of the threats were in earnest. I felt myself faltering and growing in fear. After a particularly strenuous day, I settled in bed at a late hour. My wife had already fallen asleep, and I was about to doze off when the telephone rang. An angry voice said, "Listen, nigger, we're taking all we want from you. Before next week, you'll be sorry you ever came to Montgomery." I hung up, but I could not sleep. It seemed that all of my fears had come down on me at once. I had reached the saturation point. I got out of bed and began to walk the floor. Finally, I went to the kitchen and heated a pot of coffee. I was ready to give up. I tried to think of a way to move out of the picture without appearing to be a coward. In this state of exhaustion, when my marriage had, or when my courage had almost gone, I determined to take my problem to God. My head in my hands, I bowed over the kitchen table and prayed aloud. The words I spoke to God that midnight are still vivid in my memory. I am here taking a stand for what I believe is right. And now I am afraid the people are looking to me for leadership. And if I stand before them without strength and courage, they too will falter. I am at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. I've come to the point where I can't face it alone. At that moment, I experienced the presence of the divine, and I had never before experienced him. Um, it seemed as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying, "Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for truth. God will be at your side forever." Almost at once, my fears began to pass from me. My uncertainty disappeared. I was ready to face anything. The outer situation remained the same, but God had given me inner calm. 3 nights later, our home was bombed. Strangely enough, I accepted the word of the bombing calmly. My experience with God had given me a new strength and trust. I knew now that God is able to give me the interior resources to face the forms and the storms and problems of life. Let this affirmation be our ringing cry. It will give us courage to face the uncertainties of the future. It will give our tired feet new strength as we continue our forward stride toward the city of freedom. When our days become dreary with low hovering clouds and our nights become darker with a thousand midnights, let us remember that there is a great benign power in the universe whose name is God, and he is able to make a way out of no way and transform dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows. This is our hope for becoming better men. This is our mandate for seeking to make a better world. And that covered chapters, well, yeah, just chapter 13. I'll go ahead and end this episode there because this has already been over half an hour. Let me go ahead and say this. I have to apologize because I detest using such an ugly word. But again, I feel for history to have its strongest effect, you cannot censor history. Or we have what we have now in some places where people know very little about some events. So, again, I feel some things have to be in entirety. But yeah, Dr. King talking about his faith as a grounding power that keeps him going in the civil rights struggle. And that's essentially what that chapter is about. He says, there have been times he has felt it is life is at its darkest and hope at its dimmest. But during the Montgomery bus boycott, when it seemed that way, he gave in and spoke to God, prayed to God, and he felt that divinity, that everything would be all right. And as he said, it so steadied his courage, his hope, that he accepted the bombing of his home in Montgomery with a calmness. But yeah, I want to thank you all for watching. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.